All right, almost there. Okay, awesome. Our live stream is set up. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next workshop in our virtual ministry fair, Servants of the Spirit, Gifts for Ministry. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Ms. Ada Ramirez for providing Spanish translation for today's session. There is no default language, so please be sure to click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and select either English or Spanish. Let me just get that set up. That's started, so make sure that you select your language at the bottom of the screen. As a reminder, the session is being live streamed on the Diocesan Facebook page and YouTube channel, and the recording will remain available for viewing on demand. A link to that video, along with the resources presented, will also be available on the EDLA Convention website at www.diocesanconvention.com. We're joined by Tim Alderson, Executive Director for Seeds of Hope, a ministry of the Diocese of Los Angeles, whose goal is to cultivate wellness in our community. We want to make tonight a conversation, so anytime you have a question or comment, just raise your digital hand and join in. So with that, I'm going to turn it to you, Tim.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So just a bit of background before we get into conversation about Seeds of Hope. Seeds of Hope was created 2013, the beginning of 2013. It all started with conversation that I had with our recently departed Bishop Bruno, who was at the time the diocesan bishop, and had just gotten the news that he had in fact survived leukemia. That was a rough time, as many will recall, and it came as a pleasant surprise to everyone that the good doctors at City of Hope had figured out how to not just put him in remission, but actually, as they said, made him metabolically clear. So he was done with cancer. It went away, never came back for the rest of his life. And at the time he had a whole new lease on life, and was excited to figure out, well, what can I do? What should I do with this gift of, a remainder of time? And a lot of things transpired during that time, but he became very, very interested in and concerned about and committed to the idea of addressing food insecurity in many of the low-income communities that the diocese serves, and all the things that spin out from food insecurity, the negative health impacts, and it impacts everything, right? It's a domino, and he felt like, well, the church ought to be able to do something. And he and I were talking. I was visiting in the hospital one day, and he said, when I get out of here, I want to do something around food in the diocese. And I said, okay. And the reason he asked me a tiny bit about my background, so I've spent an entire lifetime in agriculture, and I am a fifth generation Los Angeles County farmer. So this is my entire context, and there's a lot of things that I've accomplished over the years in that regard. But that's why he said, hey, would you be interested in helping me do something like that? And I said, sure. And he said, well, okay. So he got out of the hospital, and I remember very clearly it was late November 2012. We went out to breakfast. I assumed, for the sake of having a brainstorming conversation about his big idea, and I'm not exaggerating, the first words out of his mouth over breakfast were, I want to start in January. This is late November. He says, I want to start in January. And I'm thinking, start what? And he's figuring that I would figure that out. So, anyone who knew Bishop Bruno knew that was kind of his style, right?
Yeah.
I used to joke that if you wanted to understand Bishop Bruno's management style, all you needed to know was his first career, which was as an offensive lineman for the Denver Broncos. You just you huddle up, you make a plan, you execute, there's bodies all over the field, and you get up and do it again. And that's kind of...
No, I think that's a great description.
I told him that, and he didn't disagree. So anyway, that's how we started Seeds of Hope. So I came back to him with a plan that I called Farming the Diocese. And what I meant by that, and this is how it began, was that I said to him, the diocese is 6 counties, and there's 200 plus institutions, mostly churches, of course, but other things. And I said to him, the thing that all of those entities have in common apart from whatever, cool churchy stuff they're doing, is they have a physical location. And those physical locations can be used for more than the primary purpose, right? So they can all be used to also grow food and or distribute food, and that's how we began with that plan of farm the diocese. That grew exponentially to the point where we are now, where Seeds of Hope, we're working in over 100 communities across 6 counties. We have a network of a little over 90 urban farms, little farms, and there are over, these numbers change, it's dynamic, but right now it's about 75 food pantries and 70 meal programs, and then we also provide nutrition education, healthy cooking classes, garden instruction, a lot of things all around food, and all geared towards improving the health of those who don't have easy, affordable access to things like fresh fruits and vegetables. Everything that we do, though, and we did, there's a space for anybody who's been to Echo Park, to St. Paul's Commons. There is next door to the building a vacant lot. Once upon a time there was a house there, but it was going to fall down on somebody, so they took it down. And for a long time it was a vacant lot. And ultimately Bishop Bruno said, you guys can have that lot, turn it into something productive. And it's a good example. We decided to use that space to demonstrate all the ways in which a garden or an urban farm can be used to benefit the community. And there are multiple layers of benefit that are demonstrated in that space. And they demonstrate many of the ways that churches or other organizations can come at this work, right? There's a lot of really great legitimate reasons to grow food.
How tough was it to transform that plot?
It's on a hill. If you've been to Echo Park, you know where the whole thing sits on a hill.
Yeah.
And it was just a bunch of weeds. And like I said, there had been a house there. And so like most other houses, it had a lawn, and lawn equals Bermuda grass, which never goes away. It just grows waist high. And so it was all hands on deck when we transformed that property. Luis Garibay kind of spearheaded the grunt work on that, and it was really we all got together, lots of volunteers. We cleared all that out, and the idea was to terrace the hill in such a way, terracing, mulching, and our selection of plants and how we planted them, such that all of the water that comes onto that property stays on that property. It doesn't just run off down the hill into the gutter. And so one of the things we wanted to demonstrate was how to be resource responsible. And that's one of those things. Water is a precious commodity in Southern California, as we all know. And so preparing the land was a big part of that. And I mean, as long as we're getting into the weeds, it was like a dad joke right there. But we'll just detour just a tiny bit. One of the things you want to do if you're going to do that is amend your soil with plenty of organic matter. So putting compost into the soil, so you improve the soil structure so that it can, so that water will penetrate the soil better, and the soil will hold water better. And then adding mulch or wood chips or some such kind of, and we have that much of a layer of wood chips on top. That helps to prevent evaporation. So you're getting water into the soil and you're holding it there. And the way the thing is terraced and the plants that we used helps do all that. We included a number of fruit trees. Fruit trees are a wonderful thing that congregations can use. Fruit trees do a lot of things. First of all, they're trees, and they provide shade and they cool the surrounding environment rather substantially. They're pretty. They're nice to hang out in, sort of park-like. We designed the space to be more like a park than a farm. It's not just in rows on a grid. So it's very welcoming, like a park. There's shade there. We make responsible use of water, and we're producing food. So all those trees produce fruit. We also included, we also included native plants, lots of them. They're very obviously drought tolerant in that they are of this environment, right? So they're used to using little water and so on, but they're really also very important for attracting the kinds of insects that you want, for attracting pollinators, which is hugely important when you're growing fruit, whether it's on trees or on plants, and attracting other beneficial insects that eat the bugs we don't want. And it really was miraculous when we planted it. The bees and the butterflies found us. And at the time, it was still illegal to keep bees in Los Angeles. You couldn't just have a beehive, right? So you had to lure them, and we did, and they just showed up. It was amazing. And then we planted vegetables, but we didn't just plant vegetables and fruiting plants like tomatoes and squash and peppers and things like that, but as well as vegetables like leafy greens and such. But rather than just planting them in the ground, which is never safe to do in an urban environment because most urban soils are contaminated with heavy metals from former practices like lead paint, lead gasoline, all that stuff. But rather than just put up raised beds, which is a good way of dealing with that problem, we use a material it's sort of like if you've seen, if you drive along the freeway, sometimes they have those kind of mesh tubes that are there to control erosion, sort of like that. But they call them garden socks, but it's like dirt sausages, if you want to call it that. But we got this beautiful soil blend from a partner of ours, and we stuffed these things. And what it allowed us to do was to create a vegetable garden in the form of a labyrinth. And we call it the Living Labyrinth. And that was a way to also connect what we're doing to the spirituality of the place. So we were dealing with demonstrating environmental responsibility, responsible use of resources like water and land, creating an open park-like welcoming setting for the neighborhood, a really lovely amenity for the neighborhood, producing food for our neighbors in need, and creating a contemplative space. So a labyrinth is a wonderful, we all know it's a ancient Christian meditative practice, but it's a physical, kinetic meditative practice. And it's a lovely thing. You walk the labyrinth and you're quite literally getting centered. You get to the center and you come back out and now you're, centered, which is great. But then, and this gets at my own issues spiritually, but it's sort of like, well, great, you're centered and that's awesome. So what are you going to do with that centeredness now? How are you going to serve others with that? And so we created this opportunity to help to extend this idea of kinetic meditation and worship and create tasks. So there's this opportunity to engage with the plants, and the intentional plants and the unintentional plants. The unintentional plants being weeds, right? So you can work, you can pull weeds, you can tend plants, you can harvest, you can whatever, and that has proven to be a really meaningful thing for a lot of people who come and volunteer in that space. In fact, I didn't know there was such a thing, but they found us and they came. There's actually an international group of labyrinth facilitators. Who knew? But they're headquartered in Portugal, and they found us and they came and for their annual gathering, they stayed in the retreat center there at St. Paul's Commons, and they spent their time in the Living Labyrinth. And those people it was really cool to watch. And the thing that was interesting about it is that most of them were engaged with weeding. And if you think about it, there's some powerful metaphorical spirituality there, the practice of weeding, right? but also, tending the plants, and you realize that if you're there tending this plant and or harvesting the fruit, that you're now in relationship with the person who needs and will receive that food. You may never meet them, but you're in tangible relationship with those people, and that's very powerful to people. So there's a lot of we hoped to demonstrate in some way a lot of the ways and reasons people come to this kind of work, all of which are awesome and completely legitimate, right? So it may be a concern for the environment. It may be a concern for food justice. It may be a concern for spirituality and various expressions of that. And it may be a desire to build community and creating welcoming space. And there's lots of the Echo Park space is just one example. There's lots of wonderful examples around
Well, I
the
love that
diocese.
example. That's so cool. Not only were you able to use that plot of land to demonstrate so many things and build so much on it, but it started as basically unusable. It was on a hill. It was in downtown LA. It was
Yeah.
overgrown. But even with all of that, you were able to build this beautiful contemplative, incredible what you were able to build on top of that.
Yeah. And it's also another great example. And I talk to churches about this a lot. There's always this concern of sustainability. Like, what if it doesn't last? What if we fail? What if everything dies and it all grows into weeds? And I reassure people by telling them that of course that'll happen. It happens every time. And they go,
Mhm.
what? And I go, well, it is a death and resurrection cycle. And that in itself is very, very, very powerful, right? You can build this beautiful garden, it can flourish, it can be neglected, it can die, and it's still there waiting to be resurrected. It's the slightest amount of tending and it will come right back. And so there's death, resurrection, grace, forgiveness. It's all there, and it's all um, I tell church people this a lot, and most of us now live in urban or suburban environments. I told you I'm a fifth generation farmer. When my grandfather was farming here 100 years ago, 40% of Americans were directly involved in producing food, and now it's less than 1%. The spiritual theological implication of that is that we have these scriptures that were written in agrarian societies. They're chock full of agrarian metaphors, which are, they're great. But if you're actually involved in growing food, they're even that much more meaningful, right?
Mm.
All of that stuff has all these layers of meaning if you go, oh yeah, I get, yeah, I know that, And so the crop cycle, the cycle of the seasons, the it's a death and resurrection cycle, and it is both demanding and forgiving,
Mhm.
but it is different than how we live in our modern urban life, right? It requires planning, requires diligence. If you want to eat, you need to be thinking about 3, 4, 6 months ahead of time.
Yeah.
I did a lot of work with school gardens for a number of years, and it's a great lesson for children that we all learned in our academic career that it's possible, not advisable, but possible to goof off for the entire semester, ignore your homework, and then study like crazy and pass the final. You can't do that if you want to eat, right? You
Mm.
can't. There's no cramming for harvest. You can cram for a final, but you can't cram for harvest.
Yeah.
So that's that thing about growing food. And there's, however you come at this, like I was saying earlier, there's multiple layers of benefit, multiple layers of impact in the community, whether you intentionally pursue them or not. You may pursue one thing, but these other things are there, and so many examples of that around the diocese. So I don't remember how we got off on this tangent. I live my life on tangents, but I don't remember how I got there.
Well, I'm going to take this opportunity to welcome the couple latecomers. Where tonight's workshop is a conversation. So anytime you got a question, comment, would like to join in, go ahead and jump in. Well, why don't I ask you this? So if you're at your church and you don't have any kind of program like this, you don't have a garden, you don't have any kind of food program, what's maybe something easy? What's a good first project, or what should you be looking at? Like where can you start? What's a good place to start with?
I'm going to answer that question, and I'm going to preface it with this, which
Okay.
is the most important thing. This is what I tell congregations all the time. The most important thing you got to do up front is ask yourself the question, why?
Hmm.
Because in the answer to that question lies the sustainability of whatever you're setting out to do. There has to be clarity around that, because what happens is, especially with vegetable gardens, which is usually what happens, people say they want to do something, so they say, well, let's put in a vegetable garden, which is the hardest thing to do. That takes the most effort and is most prone to failure. I tell people growing vegetables is like running a daycare. If you turn your head for 5 minutes, somebody will end up dead. You just it's very hands-on, right?
Yeah.
Planting fruit trees is a great way to go. But so
Okay.
whatever the why is, and the reason is because I said you can say, let's, we're going to have a church garden or a church farm or whatever, and then you hold a big you do a bunch of fundraising. That's always fun. And then you have a big work day, and you get everybody out, community, and you have balloons and a bouncy house and a barbecue, and it's fun. And you put the thing in, and then you step back and go, look what we did. And then, you got to keep it going. So then you plan the next work day a month later, and now there's half as many people. And
Mm.
you do that each month, and you cut by half until you get to the middle of July, and it's 150 degrees outside, and there's one person standing out in the garden with a shovel with no help. And they're asking themselves, why am I doing this? And there's no answer.
Mm.
And that's the end of the garden. So the first question is, why are we doing this? And there's a million legitimate reasons. You just have to find your legitimate reason and the one that resonates with your congregation. So that. In terms of getting started, here's a good example. I was visiting with a church one time. I won't tell you who they are, where they were, but
No naming
but they
names.
were no. They're lovely people. I mean, seriously, they're wonderful people. But I don't want to, and I don't mean this to be embarrassing, so I won't say who they are, because it shouldn't be embarrassing, but it doesn't matter. So we were talking. They were one of those churches in the diocese that is farther out from the center of Los Angeles, and it was built during the Bishop Bloy era. And I'm told that Bishop Bloy had a philosophy of expansion as LA was rapidly expanding, and new neighborhoods were being built, and new churches were being built in those new neighborhoods. That apparently, as I understand it, his philosophy was built, start with more ground than you think you'll need, because you'll want to grow into it. So there are a lot of churches out in the farther edges of the diocese that have, a lot of acreage. I mean, there are churches with 3 to 5 acres, and this is one of those. And what they did back in those days, and it's very common, was you buy the big piece of ground, and then you create a master plan for how you're going to develop it, and then you develop phase 1, which is the multi-purpose building, right? And then it goes on from there. Some of those churches, and this was one of those, who 60 years later, all they have is the multi-purpose building and 5 acres of land.
Mm.
So because it was such it's sort of the blessing, the curse of riches, right? So they had so much space, they didn't know what to do with it. But there's an endless number of possibilities.
Mm.
And so they had, by the time I came to meet with them, they had spent 5 years planning what they were going to do. And planning is one of those things that's necessary, but it can also be paralyzing, right?
Mm.
It can be just, and it feels like progress because we're planning. But it's hard to actually commit to something and take a direction. And that's where they were stuck. We could do this, we could do that. And they were all awesome plans. And like, you could do all of that, but that's a lot. And that's part of the trouble of moving forward, is getting stuck with, big ideas. So I told them, I said, look, and this is true for every church. The most important thing you need to do is start, because there's a big difference between talking about what we're going to do and talking about what we do. What we're going to do is very amorphous and aspirational, right? But what we do is an identity statement. What we do is who we are. We're the church that, like Sam, your congregation at St. Andrew's in Fullerton, that's a very clear identity statement right in your front yard. And for those who don't know, St. Andrew's in Fullerton is a fantastic example of a congregation who really got clear about what they wanted to do and embraced it as their identity. Just really quick, they took a giant, obscene amount of lawn and converted it into food growing space, but not just food growing space, but just this beautiful public amenity. It's gorgeous. It's designed as liturgical space. It's designed as food growing space. And because it's St. Andrew's and the patron saint of fishermen, their garden beds are actually rowboats, little dinghies. It's really cool. And they did all that with a clear vision. So anyway, back to the church that I was talking about, I said to them, the first thing you got to do is just get started. And I tell churches this all the time. You got to focus on what you have. There's a really common human trait of throwing roadblocks up for ourselves by telling ourselves what we can't do and what we don't have. I had this conversation with a church in a very low income, high crime neighborhood. They wanted to help their neighbors. And so we started talking about what they could do. And every conversation, every suggestion was met by, yeah, but. We could do this, yeah, but, blah, 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 blah. And I said, look, let's just stop. I said, there's no point making a list of, I said, the world is full of things, almost all of which are not yours. So there's no point making a list of what you don't have and what you can't do. Let's just make a list with what you have. And we don't have much. That's an easy list to make, right? And as I was talking, we were sitting in the parish kitchen, and I just happened to glance over, and right perfectly framed in the window was this old neglected orange tree that's been there forever, and it was full of oranges. And I said, look, I said, you got an orange tree right there. I said, if we just harvested those oranges and shared them with the neighbors, right now you're in the food relief business. And one of the parishioners said, I kid you not, he goes, well, yeah, but the fruit is so high up we can't reach it. It's a bet that somewhere on the property there's a ladder, and we could, so starting, I always tell people, start by doing all that you can with what you already have. That's stewardship. Okay. Usually we hear the word stewardship in church and we think that's code word for get out your checkbook, which is often the case. But in fact, all of these churches, most of these churches in the diocese, are old enough that nobody who attends there was there when it was built. So it's been entrusted to this generation to be stewards of this property. So what are all of the ways in which that property, these people, can serve the needs of the surrounding community with what they already have? That's where you start. And that means looking not just in the front door of the church, but turning around and looking out into the community and identifying, what does this community actually need? And what do we have that can actually address that? And I always put it like this, it's this equation, how I look at it. Need plus capacity equals responsibility, right? So we look at the need that's in the community. We look at the capacities that we have with our infrastructure, with the people and the experience and expertise we have in the congregation. And somewhere in there, we're going to find what is our mission, in terms of serving the community.
Yeah. Daniel, did you have something to add?
Hi, Daniel.
I thought I saw you talking, but you're still muted, so I didn't hear anything you said. No? All right. Just wanted to check. If you want to jump in, you're welcome to. Just unmute.
We'll get back to you, Daniel.
All right, I'm sorry.
Sometimes I do that, and I move my lips, so it's forgive me. I'm enjoying it. Move on.
All right.
So, thank you very much. And I'm not a latecomer, I'm a newcomer.
You're a newcomer. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me. You're right. All right. I'm sorry. I interrupted you, Tim. Go on.
No, it's good. It's good. So with this church, who had been planning for 5 years, I said the most important thing is to get started. And so we were in this meeting. It was on a weekend, and I told them about a great book that would help them get started. And so I got out my phone, I ordered it on Amazon. I said, it'll be here on Tuesday. I said, what you need to do is this. You need to build just a 4x8 garden bed right out by the front door of the church, right where everybody has to walk past it when they come in the building. Never mind about irrigation. You can work that out later. It doesn't matter that it's not plumbed. It doesn't matter. Watering can. The point is, plant it right out front. And I want you to plant some leafy greens, some radishes. These are things that will grow fast. They'll be ready in 30 days. And I said to the priest, I want you to figure out, I'm not a liturgist, but I want you to figure out some way to fit this in the liturgy. So you're gonna build this garden bed this week. You're gonna plant it this week, and next Sunday, stick it in the liturgy somewhere. I want you to walk everybody outside, and I want you to bless this thing, throw some holy water on it, whatever you priesty types do. That's cool. Do that. And now it's like, because you're affirming a collective communal identity in this church. This is what we're about. And we're clear that we're going to share this with our neighbors. And someday we're going to plant this whole 5 acres or whatever, but here we are. We are this people. I said, and then, everybody's going to walk by it every Sunday. And I said, in 30 days, it's going to be ready. I want you to harvest it, but I want you to harvest it and again, figure out the liturgy of it. But I want you to then bring the harvest to the altar during the service, and wherever it is in the prayer book, figure it out. I want you to bless this offering, right? And then after church, I want you all to sit down and have a communal meal, and I want it to include a salad that you have made of all this thing that you've harvested and you've blessed, and you've said, this is who we are and this is the journey we are embarking on together. And today they have a living labyrinth like the one we have downtown. Oh, wow. And it's just the most productive, beautiful thing. And they're thinking about their next stages. They've already figured out they're going to plant a big orchard right out front on the that faces the road, and they've just got all these big plans. And they're a small mission congregation, and they don't have a lot. They don't have a lot of people. Many of them are aging, and all those limitations. But they have figured out how to focus on the things that are not their limitations. It's very easy to focus on the limitations. It's like, well, what can we do? And they're very much the poster children for this kind of thing. So where should a congregation start? Focus on your why. Do all that you can with what you already have, and figure out among the myriad reasons why one might want to plant a garden or a small farm. And whatever that is, do that. Just get started is what I always say. Just get started. Yeah. Because once you're doing it, it becomes an identity statement. This is who we are. That's powerful beyond belief. I think Daniel had a question now.
Oh, he was commenting that was a lovely idea. Oh, and I like that. I like, not only is it you have to do something, it's you can't separate the why out. The spiritual aspect of it, it doesn't separate from the rest of it. It all comes together. It's not that you can build a contemplative, meditative, spiritual space. It comes along with it. Right. I like that you have to have the why, you have to have the identity, you have to be looking at the needs of the community in order to have a successful program. It comes together. I like that.
Daniel.
and maybe after that, or during your meal, or sometime, you can then talk about how you've just been regenerating the soil and mitigating the effects of the climate crisis.
Exactly.
But have the meal first.
Yeah.
Right? Well, but you're right. But over a communal meal is when you get to have those multi-layered conversations, right? When you talk about, well, there's food to feed our neighbors who can't afford this kind of nutritious food, right? And and we just everything we did in that garden helped to mitigate climate change, right?
Mhm.
And we're sequestering all these things. We're sequestering carbon into the soil. We're using our fruit trees to pull carbon out of the environment. We're using our fruit trees to create shade and cool the immediate environment. And we're creating welcoming open space for our neighbors and there's all these cool layers of benefit.
Yeah.
And it makes people happy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. That is huge in terms of the human benefit to the community, to the congregation, and how the congregation becomes more a part of the community. So for example, going back to Echo Park, one of the things we do every year during daylight saving, so half the year, is we do a thing called Friday night farming. So once a month, we open up then it's a promoted event. So Friday night farming, come. We start around 5 and people start filing in after work, and we work in the garden until the sun goes down at around, starts to go to around 7 o'clock. So we work for a couple hours, and then we go up on the roof at St. Paul's Commons, and we share a meal together that our team has prepared with ingredients from the garden. And it's just a wonderful time for people to hang out together and enjoy one another's company. And what's interesting is we open up to everybody around the diocese, but for the most part, it's the neighbors in the community in Echo Park who aren't necessarily Episcopalians, don't attend church or whatnot, but it has become one of their favorite things about living in Echo Park is this Friday night farming thing that we do. And it's just wonderful, and like Daniel said, making people happy and
Yeah.
just having
Welcoming
people to
the
talk
neighbors. A real
Absolutely.
welcome.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea of stewardship. It's not just pulling out your pocketbook when, the fall comes and it's time to have your campaign. Stewardship is about taking care of God's gift, treasuring those gifts and celebrating them too, and sharing them. And I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, I wrote a piece years ago, and it's more complicated than this, or more elaborate than this, but it was the theology behind Seeds of Hope. But it really boils down to Matthew chapter 25 and James chapter 2, right? It's about, in Matthew 25, Jesus gives this parable about about what it means to be of service, right? So, and how everything that we do is sort of doing it to Him, for good or for bad, right?
Mhm.
And so that looks like, and He lays it out. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was in prison, you visited me, and when I was sick, you comforted me. All right, there's a list. And then second chapter of James, it has to do with one's faith and the effect that does or doesn't have on others, right? So how faith without works, in other words, if faith doesn't change you in a way that leads you in a way to serve others, then what good is that faith? And that tells you a little bit about my faith journey and the living labyrinth. It's like, okay, now you're all nice and centered. What are you going to do with your centeredness? How is that going to help others? And it's also, we also created, not, I can give you the link, but back in 2013, a diocesan convention, the diocese adopted a diocesan food policy that really gives congregations some guidance on how to be with food and how to use their resources to serve their neighbors who are hungry. And quite a few congregations then went through the process of their vestry formally adopting that as a parish policy. But it's all very much tied to not only Scripture, but also our baptismal covenant. And it's very, you know what? I might have it right here, and I can tell you a little bit about that. So it's a resolution, but the background is, and I'll just read it to you. Within the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles, 4.5 million people are living in poverty. 3 million people, including a quarter of all the children, suffer from hunger or food insecurity, and 2/3 of the people, including a fifth of the children, are overweight or obese. Obesity rates are 50% higher among those suffering from poverty and food insecurity due to a lack of affordable access to fresh, nutritious food. Obesity causes or exacerbates numerous health conditions, thereby increasing healthcare costs, decreasing income, and shortening lifespans for those affected. We are compelled by our baptismal covenant to seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving our neighbors as ourselves, and to respect the dignity of every human being. Because our churches, schools, and other institutions possess land and facilities with the capacity to produce and distribute food, and are populated by people willing to offer their time, talents, expertise, experience, and labor to produce and distribute food, this resolution has been offered as a policy of the diocese, and it breaks down like this. Be it resolved.
If anyone's curious on the text of the resolutions, that's on the convention website. I do have a couple of links to the history of resolutions passed. Convention coordinator, excellent. So anything convention.
Excellent. And we have it in English and Spanish too. So here's the quick part of the resolution without all the be it resolves things. The churches, schools, and other institutions of the diocese commit fully to use all of their resources or offer them up to community partners to use for food production and distribution to our neighbors in need. Also, wherever food is served or distributed at food pantries, feeding programs, social gatherings, coffee hours, Sunday school, youth activities, etc., the churches, schools, and schools and institutions of the diocese commit to offering fresh, nutritious food, and churches, schools, institutions, and so on, commit to refrain from serving or distributing food or beverages with little or no nutritional value that contribute to obesity and poor health. So it's a fairly brief but all-encompassing guidance on how we can be with food in our churches in a way that supports our community and demonstrates our commitment to the people that we serve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was from the bishop's address at, let's see, what year was that? 2013. Yeah. So if anyone's interested in looking that up, that's on the convention website. Yeah. All right. So those are good. If you're starting a food program, you want to ask the why, you want to look at the needs of the community, you want to start something, anything, start it small. What else would you say?
The most important thing, I think I say that at the beginning of everything I'm about to say, don't I?
All the most important thing.
All important. Don't get it wrong. No, but one of the things, like I said, looking out into the community and understanding what the community needs. A lot of these churches have been around a long time, and the neighborhoods in which they were built are populated by people who look differently than the people who were in the neighborhood when they were built. And the most important thing is to take the time to get to know your neighbor, right? You can't love your neighbor as yourself if you don't even know your neighbor. And it's really important to not make the same mistake of previous generations of being very paternalistic and condescending and assuming we know what other people need. It's more important to get to know our neighbors and to the point of becoming friends with our neighbors and let them reveal to us what they what they need and what they prefer. And food is a big example of that, right? So we all have the food traditions, the food preferences that we grew up with. we have that term comfort food, right? There are foods that comfort us, and they comfort us because they are familiar to us and they remind us of what mom used to make and all of that. But we all come from different places, and our moms made different things.
Mhm.
And one of the things that, Southern California is, and Los Angeles in particular, is full of immigrants. So people came from other places where food traditions are different than everybody around us has their own unique food traditions. So it's really important to get to know that. It's a way of bonding over getting to know each other's food. Like, what? That's amazing. I never had that. That's delicious. But when you decide to start growing food for the community, it's really important to know what food the community wants. And you can only know that if you get to know the community.
Mhm.
And it's also a way of allowing people to feel welcome when they come to your church. We've been in pandemic for a year and a half. Nobody comes to church. Eventually, people will come back to church. And eventually, there will be the opportunity to sit down for a meal together or even just coffee hour. If those gatherings one of the ways for those to feel welcoming, truly welcoming, is for us to have foods that are familiar to the people we want to welcome. The flip side is not to have foods that are off-putting to people we want to welcome. And I say that because one of the things I know about the Episcopal Church, and it's not unique, is full of aging congregations. And I've had this conversation many times with many congregations. They want to know how we're going to attract young families. One of the things that doesn't occur to people who aren't necessarily in conversation with those young families is that coffee hour can actually be repellent. It seems crazy because who doesn't love coffee hour, right? Donuts and coffee. But young families, by definition, are young couples with young children. And young families are, this generation is much more conscious and concerned about the nutrition of the food that they feed their families, their children, than previous generations, right? Where anything tasty was a treat for your kid. Imagine you're a young family, you've been frazzled all week long, you got to get the kids ready for school, you got to do 10 things at once. And now, one more time, you got to get up early and get the kids to school, and you're trying to get them dressed, you're trying to get them fed, you're trying to, oh my God, we get this, yeah. And you know that when you get to church, you're going to have the conversation about why you can't have a donut.
Mm-hmm.
That can be enough of a reason not to go to church right there. So getting to know the people that you want to welcome and how you welcome them. And food is always the way that we always gather, right? So that's an important thing, it's wonderful to gather over food. It's wonderful to be generous with food, but to be mindful about who you're welcoming. And that could be your immigrant neighbors. It could be your neighbors who are young families with small children, and taking the time to get to, when you're other focused, everything's going to go much better. Everything you want is going to magically come to you. Not that easy, but it's just about, love your neighbor.
Yeah.
Who's my neighbor was the following question in that story. But that's, yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. So we're almost at the top of the hour. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about or touch on tonight?
That's dangerous to ask me that question. My wife.
We can always schedule a follow-up conversation. I think this would be great.
Is there anything else you want to? That's an overly open-ended question, Sam.
Well, I like what we've touched on. I like that we've talked about food gardens. We've talked about the labyrinths, the examples from across the diocese, talking to our neighbors, getting to know our neighbors. I like all that. Is there anything maybe to cap that all off?
Yeah, I would say this about the current context that we're in. Okay. So I told you we do a lot of things, but one of the key things, and certainly the key thing since the world shut down with the pandemic is getting food to people. There are a sad number of people who have, who were food insecure before COVID, and food insecurity is linked to hunger, but it's different in a slight way. Hunger is, I literally don't have any food and I'm starving to death. Food insecurity is, I can buy food, but not all the time and not enough to keep my family healthy. It's a struggle. I can't always, I run out of money at the end of the month and now we're rationing. And, we have a lot of people who come to us who are rationing food, or who are dealing with food insecurity as a way of preventing homelessness, right? You can ration food, you can't ration rent. So it's a heartbreaking situation. COVID hit, everybody lost their job, and now all of a sudden hordes of new people were food insecure overnight. And the demand for our services quadrupled quite literally overnight. Last March compared to the previous March was quadruple the amount. And by the end of 2020, we had distributed over 26 million servings of fruits and vegetables. And we are just but one organization in LA doing the same thing. We were all overwhelmed. It was insane. And that reality is not going to slow down, right? People are getting vaccinated, case rates are going down, death rates are going down, and we're all feeling like, yay, we can go to the beach. It's just about over. And we hear that, the whole thing is being, all restrictions are being lifted on the 15th of June. So, but that doesn't get at the real tangible impact on people that are still impacted. A lot of the jobs that were lost because businesses were lost. Mm-hmm. Those jobs aren't coming back. It's going to take a long time for a lot of people to crawl back out of the hole they fell in. People who are more affluent, people who didn't lose their business, people who didn't lose their job, people who have means are looking forward to getting back to, going to the movies and going out to dinner, and that's all great. But there are a lot of people who are going to be hurting for quite some time. Back to Matthew chapter 25, that is a moment to engage one's faith and engage one's resources, and collectively congregational resources, whatever they may be. Don't bemoan what you don't have. It doesn't matter. That's not yours to work with. But to look into the neighborhood, and it's a chance to get to know your neighbors and engage everybody in helping one another. And I will say this about that too. I mentioned earlier the unfortunate history of paternalistic, condescending kind of help, where we're going to help those people. I would say don't approach it like that. Really look at people in need as your neighbors, your friends, your peers, your family, and not just. Here's the thing: in my experience, they always say there's no such thing as a free lunch, or nothing comes for free, and that is absolutely true. Free food isn't free. If you have to, it takes a lot for people to admit to themselves or anybody else that they need help. And a lot of people will struggle mightily before they ever go ask for help, because, like I said, free food isn't free. The price of free food is a little slice of your dignity. Mm. You've got to admit to yourself that you can't provide for yourself, and more painfully, you got to admit to yourself you can't provide for your family. So, to the extent that you can help people without requiring that loss of dignity, is huge. Churches can do that by giving people an opportunity to serve, not just be served, right? So if I can volunteer at the food pantry, or I can volunteer at the communal garden, now I am helping my neighbors, and I feel a little bit better about, so like we do this with Friday Night Farming, right? You can work, take home as much food as you want. Come share a meal with us and take home as much food as you want. Now I don't feel like a charity case,
Mm.
right? Now I feel like I helped my community, I helped others, and I feel okay about taking some food home for my family. So be really, I would just say, be really, really, really mindful um, about preserving the dignity of others. It's part of our baptismal covenant. It's wise. Um, it's really hugely important when you can reach out like that, help people, preserve their dignity by giving them the opportunity to help others. You're building community, and all that stuff that you might have been worried about how are we going to grow the congregation? Well, never mind that. Serve the community.
Mm.
Serve the community.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That brings us to the top of the hour. I think that was a great note to end on. So thank you so much, Tim, for this conversation. I look forward to doing this again. I'd love to do a follow-up. Thank you so much,
Thank
Ada,
you.
for providing Spanish translation. Thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. As a reminder, the recording will be posted on the Diocesan Facebook page and YouTube channel, and that will also be available on the EDLA convention website at diocesanconvention.com. And thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your night.